Hello, this is Mike Oliver with another SOA guiding principle. Verify that services satisfy business requirements and goals. You probably have something along this line of thought, a SMART goal. They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time-based. Now, when you're building a SOA environment, none of these go away. Services are just a tool by which you can improve the strategic development and return on investment. But they should always meet these specific goals, and they should always be considered in terms of where they fit, how they measure up, and so forth. So, you always want to ask yourself about a proposed service. And this should be built into your service lifecycle governance process and should be maybe even a checkbox on a form that the solutions architect that is proposing this service will check off. So, does having this service improve the ROI of the systems that use it? Now, if a service actually reduces the performance of a given system because you have to then marshal and unmarshal the requests, you have to do a protocol transformation, or you have to do a data model transformation because it's a service, then you probably don't want to do that. There are other factors we'll get into, but that's the bottom line. Does the service meet the business requirements? If you need to change the way it behaves because it's a service, you really have to look and make sure that the service still meets the business requirements. Does the service enhance future systems? Now, if you've got a system that is maybe even a little more expensive because you're making it a service for the first application, but future systems would be able to reuse that, then there may be a good return on investment. So that goes back to number one. Is the service now or in the near future going to be reused by multiple applications? It's a slightly different point of view. Now, enhanced future systems may be because you want to add some functionality, or it may be that you want to just improve the performance and you want to have this particular piece optimized. But it may not be reused. So having it, the question, will it be reused by multiple applications, is slightly different. Is the service autonomous? In other words, is that free from dependencies? If it's dependent on a database and the connectivity to the database, then it may not be something that is autonomous, because it could be a single point of failure. It could be something that's dependent on some other system running to perform its duties. So in that case, if it's not autonomous, it may not be a good candidate for a service. So if any of the previous were yes, then you want to ask the question, can this service be used in a composite service? Now, what I mean there is that some services are atomic. They do one thing, they do it well, they're autonomous, they're loosely coupled, and you don't have to worry about them, and therefore that's where they serve their best purpose. But you may, because of your standardized service contracts or your canonical schema or your domain schema, you may not be able to use that in a composite service because it has specific requirements. Now, if it can be used in a composite service, or if you can change its design so that it can be used in a composite service, like going with a standardized service contract and canonical schema, then you have to ask, if so, will it improve the ROI? In other words, is it worth the money you're going to spend to make it into a composite member? Is it going to be worthwhile? Can this service be used by consumers outside the firewall? Because of the internal schema and the internal security mechanism, you may have to have a different implementation for services that are used outside the firewall or through the firewall. So you want to consider that. And if it's true that you want both, you have to consider the differences between the two. If you see multiple consumers of this service, have you considered designing for scale? Can you have multiple instances of this service? Going back to the autonomous feature. If it's not autonomous, you probably can't have multiple copies of it. Or if it's not multi-tenant, you may not be able to have multiple copies, and so forth. So keep in mind that you need to design for scale if it's going to be multiple different consumers reusing this service. If no is the answer to any of these, then you want to consider creating an API instead of a service, so that you can use a coding method to access the functionality, and it could be in a shareable library instead of a service. That might offer the same benefits. It depends on how frequently that method is going to change. It has to do with the cost of developing the service versus the method. It has to do with whether the custom code that you've written that would use that shareable library is accessible. You may have some commercial off-the-shelf software that needs to use it, and through their API you can use a service, but you can't really do an API. And then consider whether the same functionality can be coded into another service and make it a parameter-driven option. If you have a service that is similar or related or takes the same schema, you may be able to add it as an option, an operation that is optional in the data that comes in, instead of having a whole separate service. It also might be useful for building it into a composite service. So these are just all things to think about with proposed services. Thank you very much. This is Mike Oliver, and this is the end of this lesson.